And we are live for our pilot episode of Mythmongers with Laurel and Ali. And I'm joined by my friend Laurel. Hi,
Hi,
Laurel.
hello. Hi.
This is exciting.
So exciting. We've been talking about this for such a long time.
We have been. Now, remind me what we're doing.
What are we doing? I think we're mongering myths, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Kind of like a fishmonger, but for magic.
Mhm.
It's maybe a little bit smelly, a little bit, slimy, but yeah,
We're getting in there. We're
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 getting in
trying
there.
to figure out why myths have such an important part in our psyche and our society, and why we still hold on to myths from thousands of years ago. Yeah, I'm excited.
I am as well. The conversations continued to come up for me throughout the last few weeks as I've been chatting with friends, chatting with people in the wild. I think
Mm.
there's definitely an appetite to connect more with story, particularly when some of the stories out there are getting a little bit tired. So there's some real room to breathe creativity into all the work that we're doing collectively and being little humans on a rock in space.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think, yeah, you're pointing to something so important about myth is that it is this immortal place of finding new energy to continue on in our lives in every moment. And yeah, we're encountering some pretty repetitive narratives at this point that are quite harmful. And it's
Hmm.
maybe just the right time to go back to the magic, and
Yeah.
see what's there for us.
Yeah, well, we're doing the dance of the pilot episode, and I think something pertinent for us as we get started. I mean, for the friends that are giving this a listen, and maybe future listeners who go back in the catalog and figure out where we started, maybe it's good to start with a little bit about our journeys and what makes us feel like we should be talking about myth. And maybe I'd invite you to kick us off there if I can put you on the spot.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sally. Well, I think initially I want to talk about you and I and how we connected.
Yes.
So, we're currently in the coaching certification process, and we are taking this course that I would say is maybe more appealing to corporate leadership, like CEOs, lawyers. That's kind of the vibe in the room. And Ali and I kind of found one another because we both had morning practices of how we started our day in devotion to spirit, to myth, to really important parts of our lives that we had uncovered for ourselves in our journey. And it led us to this moment of like, oh, you're just like name dropping 1,000-year-old myths like it's nothing. Same, bro. This is my shit.
Yeah. That was definitely the vibe. We're
Yeah.
like the two magical weirdos in the class.
Absolutely. So, we kind of picked up on the energy, and I guess I wanted to start there because it was such a beautiful thing to find in a place where not a lot of magic maybe could be felt.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was an experience of mine that continues to be the mirror whenever I go out into a very corporate, rigid kind of environment and show
Mm.
up with some very logical left brain, like goal or task to orient myself around. I end up talking to somebody about like Pythagoras and Hermes Trismegistus and all of my, all my normal pastimes, just reading obscure philosophy and ancient myth.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think, okay, I'm gonna try to get back to me, but like I'm vibing off of talking about
Yeah.
how our kind of origin came together because I also recognized that we both believed in synchronicity.
Mm.
And then the things that we started talking about just popped up in my life in all of these random ways. Like you were reading the Orphaic hymns at the time. And
Mm-mm.
then I can't remember where I was traveling, but it was like Orpheus was everywhere. And then I was like, I don't know what's going on, Ali, but like, all right, here we are. I'm paying attention. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Hmm.
Something's happening here. The universe
Yeah,
is like, come
I
on,
I
let's
did that.
go.
I
You did that.
planted I planted that. I opened all of those stores named after Orpheus and knew you would go there.
I knew it. I knew it. Dang, just so we could start this podcast.
Yes, yes, gotcha.
Worked, man. Well done.
Hmm. Yeah, and we'll probably get into the topic of synchronicity a little bit as we go through kind of the themes.
Mm,
Because it's a little bit of fun around just there's no coincidences.
no, absolutely not. Yeah. So, like, this sort of tilt of seeing the world through a magical lens, I think came to me at a very young age. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian environment, and I think I really loved storytelling because of this origin. It gave me such a ability to look at the world through parable, through myth, through these kind of stories like Esther. I was like really obsessed with Esther, and these kind of points of seeing how one's mind can be shifted. The perspective can be shifted to see the good in a situation. And I went on to study the classics. I got really into philosophy in college. But then in like my late 20s, I think there was like a little, I was in the agnostic territory, just like, all right, there's something out there, but I don't know what. And I'm just sort of blindly exploring. And I found the archetypes. I had this deck by Kim Krans, and it really became this grounding force in my life that brought me a lot of comfort. And I began to see like the crone or the comic or I don't know, the mother, all of these things were all contained within me and allowed me to express parts of myself that maybe I had shamed or felt that I wasn't ready for, or yeah, parts that I didn't feel even courageous enough to inhabit. And, I think the beauty of archetypal exploration is that it tells you, hey, it's all in there. I don't know what
Mm.
stage it's in, but you contain all of this. And that
Hmm.
really allowed me to, like, find some really good grounding in my life because I'm kind of somebody who's a vagabond. I like to move around. I like to see different things and know different
Really?
things. Yeah, we'll get into it. We'll get into it. And the archetypes were like, yeah, baby, it's all normal. You're normal. It's okay. Like, you're allowed to be this. And that kind of permission through myth and archetype brought a lot of like love for myself and love for understanding others in a very nuanced way that I think I needed, maybe like saved my life in some essential ways. So
Mm.
yeah. All right. Is
Yeah.
that okay? Is that
Yeah,
good?
no, that's great. I love that connection to, the archetypes as guides and allies, as friends who kind of exist on that plane of the psyche, who have kind of nudge us in little directions that when we start to pay attention to how it's influencing us, it's hard to stop. It's hard
Mm,
to chalk it up to just, oh, it's just dreams. It's like, well, that dream has told a whole story about my life. So here we are.
exactly. Exactly. Ali, would you mind telling us how you came into archetype and mythology in your life?
Yeah, I've been reflecting on this over the last week because there's again like synchronicity and this idea of meaningful coincidences, and it's almost I've tried to articulate this journey in like a linear fashion in the past, but it's almost impossible to. Part of the archetype of wholeness is that it's not a linear path; it is a mandala or a circle, and we kind of circle around the same things and maybe
Yes.
come back to them at a different plane. And for me, I
Mm.
grew up Muslim in a very Christian or like Western environment. I was like the only Middle East. I was the only Middle Eastern kid in my class in elementary school, and I'm only half of a Middle Eastern kid. So like it was not a very diverse environment, and I looked different and learned very early about what those differences meant, like the story of what that meant in terms of where my family was from, where I am from. And one core element of this story that resurfaced for me, also late 20s, shout out to the Saturn return. I think that's what the kids are calling it. And I think it was around my grandma's passing where this story of a dream that my mom had had when she was pregnant with me kind of came back to the forefront of my mind. And I was my mom's first, and she had this dream that I was born and that my dad was going to sacrifice me. And like she had this anxiety response about this. She's like, "Oh man, like what are you doing to my baby?" And then calmness came as the baby transitioned into being a lamb, and
Yeah.
that's went through that story, and she woke up kind of startled and was like, that's a really weird dream, and like told my dad, and my dad's like, that story's in the Quran. Um,
Mm,
and that story is also in the Bible. That's
absolutely.
the story of Abraham being tested to sacrifice his son. And it's a fascinating story in my journey because within the Quran, it's said that the son was Ismail. And within the Old Testament, it's said that the son is Isaac. And this really is kind of this cultural conflict of who has the lineage towards this great story, and my
Mm,
mom being of European heritage and my dad being of Middle Eastern heritage, like that just felt like a very interesting symbol. And I stumbled then on Carl Jung and things like dream analysis and understanding symbol and terms of dream analysis. And I think my Muslim upbringing really encouraged me to go down this path because there is a very strong idea and sentiment within Islam that like religion is a science. Like
mm,
it is the science of how divinity works. Like divine laws are things that are written in how the universe works. I've discovered that's a common linkage in the metaphysical backdrop of a lot of Western thought is kind of this Pythagorean, like math is sacred. It's the language of the universe. It's where we get to things like Freemasons and the power of building and like how that's co-creation with some kind of form of creation that's innate inside of us. So like all of these things really
mm,
fascinated me, and just the rabbit hole kind of continued to get deeper and deeper I went. And I remember thinking about how, I mean, within the Quran, we have stories of prophets and great
mm,
individuals who could understand dreams and use them to interpret the future. And then here's Carl Jung as a psychologist, in the last century doing that. And I'm like,
mm,
oh, this science is a real thing.
mhm,
We've documented what that process looks like. And it led me to some very creative and artistic places. I've always been prized for my analytical ability, but then I started to see almost how analytical ability was in itself something creative,
mm.
like just unfolding of understanding through archetypes. And I think archetypes, as we'll maybe get into a little bit, are like the foundational element of myth. I love what Jung calls them in terms of like, he's like, hey, I'm a scientist. I cannot make any metaphysical presuppositions about a God existing, but I can see the imprint of something that seems like a God exist in the psyches of my patients. And like, that's what I'm witnessing. And it takes a certain form and it has a specific role in the unfolding of an individual into becoming who they are. And as I went through studying that, I also went through the process of becoming who I am, and then
Yeah.
had that understanding ground me into an experience which reinforced that what you mentioned, that practice of devotion. Like it is like really the gratitude of like, whoa, these symbols have been operating at some level that I wasn't consciously aware of, but have brought me along the journey.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I just like deeply relate to that personalization of myth being casted upon you, but then the reclaiming of how you interpret these signs and symbols in your life as guides. And I love this, yeah, assertion of the scientific or the mathematical and being an aspect of the spiritual and religious, like these can all coexist in one. And I think we're kind of in this era right now where we're starting to dissolve this boundary that was really heavy for a long time. Like these have to be worlds apart. We have to have science over here. We have to have spirituality over here. And now we're finding this merging with a lot of chaos at the same time.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
like, I'm not for all of the merging I see, some of it
There's
is.
there's some like quantum priests and interesting kind of developments coming out of new discoveries on the frontiers. But I agree with you. Yeah, it's this it really was an artificial separation
Mm,
of these two worlds of almost like things that are physical and real and things that are in a spiritual dimension and therefore exist somewhere else. And this form of materialism, I think, plagues not only like atheist thought, but even religious thought. Like it's
yeah,
like, well, this is earth and heaven and hell are somewhere else, which is a
yeah,
little bit, I mean, and Jung talks about this. It's spiritually isolating.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we also are attempting to come out of the age of isolation, right? In the 50s and 60s, we had a couple of great thinkers. I'm trying to remember who I'm thinking of. It was like The Age of Insecurity. He wrote this book.
Oh, Alan Watts?
Yeah, Alan Watts. There we go.
Wisdom
Right.
of insecurity.
Was it? Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
And in it, he's talking about, the death of God, the consequences of kind of the Nietzschean thought that have now hit us, and where do we go from here? And I think we've had this moment of like no God symbol in our culture, which Jung was really trying to address. He saw it coming, he saw it affecting culture, he saw it affecting soul and creativity. And now it's attempting to come back into the consciousness, I think, through this unification of science and spirituality. But we know there can be danger there in how we approach it and how it can be used to control others, just like religion has done for a long time. And
Mm.
yeah, there's like this, it's a really potent moment to kind of explore where we're at right now. Yeah,
Yeah. And we've talked about this. I'm reading some Nietzsche right now,
right.
and like, yeah, fascinated about this idea of like the new human who has almost the like responsibility to incorporate everything that has happened, including this like death of these systems, or the following through of these systems to this place of a really scary kind of nihilism, and to do something different with their agency, given the recognition that like we're active co-creators in this evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like, the Ubermensch, right? Is that what you're
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the Ubermensch is like such a fascinating call to action for the spirit, the soul, and the psyche that I think it's like obvious why that engages like 14 to 18-year-old teenagers. And for me, I
Yeah.
think it caught me at like 19 and I was like, this is it. Like, I'm never going to believe in anything else. I was reading the gay science like front to back many times in a row, like this affirmation. Oh my God, yes, this is the truth. Because I think we need a call to action, right? Like we're driven as a species in this way. And myths also are this attempt to formulate the call to action and a framework that we can then take into all of these other environments that exist even in modernity. Like, one of the first we talked about, Inanna, allows me on a daily basis, I think, to get through all kinds of difficulty, and I call
Mm.
upon that structure to address the art of transformation and death of psyche, or parts that need to die in order to be resurrected. Yeah, it's like we need this kind of backbone of I don't want to call it philosophy, but of truth to then help us
Mm.
through the difficulty. And Nietzsche was like, okay, it's all you. And I think there's something that I appreciate about that, but I know you and I, Ali, have like a lot of common interest and interdependence
Yes.
and communal thinking, and the way that we're connected to nature, for me, overrides that notion. And I wish I would have had it at the same time as Nietzsche, in my
Mm.
younger years, to really allow myself that these can be interconnected, because it wouldn't have felt so much in
Yeah.
solipsism all of the time.
Yeah. And that integration of things that almost seem to be opposite to one another, I think, is also essential to myth and how it unfolds. And as we think about Jung as almost a response to Nietzsche in some ways, because he was reading and giving lectures on Nietzsche for some time, and I think
Mm.
almost trying to find a more holistic lens. What Jung terms individuation, it's funny. I've brought that term up to people, and they, I think, confuse it with like being an individual, and they're like, no,
Mm.
like that can't be it. That's not, how's that spiritual? Like just being an individual. But I think that term infers the individual recognizing their place in the web around them, like
Mm.
where they are and how they're interconnected in the multiple narratives that intersect the threads of their life and their psyche.
Mm.
And that resolution of both being an individual as well as being a part of something greater is kind of the fundamental duality of existing in corporeal space.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so then I think after realizing we had this commonality of how we perceive and think in the world,
Mm,
we were really excited to delve into that. And I think today I wanted to focus on talking about who we are, but also the beauty of archetypes in general. So I'd like to hear a little more about what you think about archetypes, Ali. And like, I don't know, I heard a little bit of myth and a little bit of archetype, but yeah, I want to hear more
yeah.
how they affected you in your life.
Yeah, I almost think of archetypes as like the grammar of myth.
Hmm. Nice.
That as we look at stories across cultures, across time, and this is me kind of bringing in some Joseph Campbell influence in the hero's journey.
All
It's
right,
like,
come
yeah,
on.
it's like
Absolutely.
there's kind of a pattern to how these things play out. Like one archetype I think that's very strong in my life is this one of mother, and like whether it was in the tradition I grew up in terms of like Fatima Zahra, who's the Prophet Muhammad's daughter, or the Virgin Mary. I mean, despite being Muslim, my grandma had like a massive poster of the Virgin Mary in her house,
Cool.
and like she is a very important figure in Islam too. But like I remember looking at this woman like with her heart shining through, and like even without knowing any of the dogma around it as a kid, there was something like about this image that like would
Mhm.
capture my attention and make me feel certain ways. And I think it really comes down to almost that like capturing of attention. Like when we read a book or we read a story, there's not really any way to really be selective as to like which paragraph pops out to us and which one we gloss over and don't remember. And I think this is where the like understanding archetype and building a relationship to archetype can be very rewarding, because it's like once you start to notice what captures your attention, it's almost like a positively reinforcing feedback loop. And I think mother was one example where it's just I just kept seeing it everywhere and then reflecting on like, oh, we call the earth Mother Nature or Mother Earth.
Mm.
And like what does that have to do with this idea of motherhood? What does it have to do with the idea of how our psyche came into being, like when we're in the womb versus when we exited the womb? Like, what was that experience? Like, we might not consciously remember what that experience was like, but some part of us did experience that, experienced like darkness in that space, warmth in that space, the sound of nothing but maybe our mother's heartbeat and her voice. So, like,
Mm.
this nurturing power that sound has, even this idea of nurturance. And when we hold on to the archetype, I think it provides us the opportunity to tap into what that archetype represents. Like, I may not be a baby in a womb anymore and have that same level of comfort and nurturance, but I can summon it by applying some level of focus towards the elements of the symbol that I connect with. And in doing that and building a practice out of it, it's like, well, what objects, anchors, ideas, poems, prayers, etc., bring me more compassion or nurturance, and allow also me to occupy the space of mother, because there are situations I'm in where I'm nurturing, and that's something
Mm.
that I value cultivating. And I think anything an archetype holds is a almost like an ideal that we can aspire to bring more of into our own self. And for me, this idea that the narrative about who we are and our personality being something permeable, and the archetypes being almost models of what we can pull on as we construct who it is we want to show up as.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, and this is making me think of when we started talking about the mother archetype and yeah, Mother Mary having such an impact in both of our lives. And yeah, it's making me think that like archetype also can be this kind of divisive thing. Like
Mm,
me, I was going to this fundamentalist Christian school, but my family was Irish Catholic. And so in Catholicism, Mary is very much exalted and prayed to. And in the fundamentalist belief, really nothing should be prayed to. Even
mm.
saints are not really included in their devotion to God. And so I would get in trouble all the time. And I was like constantly arguing for Mary. I was like, Mary's the shit. And like the only one I would pray to. I was always in devotion to Mary. And yeah, getting put in like timeout, getting sent to detention. really just, it's hilarious to think about it now. Like, oh, you were praying to Mother Mary, straight to
Hmm.
jail, straight to jail.
Straight to jail. You rebel Catholic, you.
It really like gave me a good foundation to create some parts of my personality and my archetype
Yeah.
via the rebellion of Mother Mary.
Hmm.
And then, as another mind tangent while you were talking, I was thinking that we also went on a long tangent about the mystics, the matriarchal mystics within all religions that, exude somewhat of the Mother Mary archetype in a way that is so, I think, magnetizing, and yet we have no idea what is going on there. Trying to think of the saint that I told you about had the stigmatas and was blind, and she would
Hmm.
cry blood, while children were visiting her. And she was an extremely motherly figure, even though she cast this appearance of complete horror and like these really interesting contradictions that archetypes can hold, such as the
Yeah.
mother. Um, is so beautiful because it's so human. I mean, we don't hold one path of identity. We hold such vastness, and it's whenever we try to force ourselves into these tiny little silos that disease happens,
Mm.
mental illness happens, depression is falling upon us. We have to be
Mm.
vast.
Yeah. And that topic of female archetypes also, it felt like another synchronicity that, yeah, I mean, I think it was last week I stumbled on that Rosalia album and I'm like, she's just talking about female saints.
I
And
mean,
yeah,
powerful.
yeah,
Gotta love Rosalia. So hot right now.
yes, totally in, totally in.
We love it. Big fans of Rosalia.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if it might be helpful to like approach the center of archetype, which
Mm.
I think is this archetype of self. And I'd be curious to, I know I have my thoughts on it, but I'd be curious to ask your thoughts on like what the self archetype means to you.
Whew. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think,
This is my test of if you did your homework.
okay. I did, but also so much has happened to me in the last week that
Fair.
I'm going to see what rises to the top of my psyche. And I know Jung would say that's exactly what's supposed to be there. So
There
not that
you
I'm a
go.
Jungian, because Jung wouldn't approve of that, but I'm gonna, give my faith. I'm thinking in my own exploration of Jung about the relationship of self and ego and
Mm.
how they are in relationship to each other. And sometimes we see when they're extremely off, someone is either megalomaniac or they're completely depressed without meaning in their life. And so this like correlation, this alignment of self being, yeah, an aspect of connection to divinity, connection to the collective unconscious, the faith that we are all interconnected has to somehow be in relationship with your ego. And that is a difficult journey. It's like, how do we stay this individual person that has pathos and courage and identity, and also say, oh, but we're also in full relationship to everybody, coexisting in the
Mm.
unconscious together. Yeah, I think like Rosalia, like just talking about that, like, whew, perfect example. Here we are, like thinking, yeah, who's thinking about feminine mystics? Rosalia is, and she's going to remind us.
Yeah. 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 No, I love that. And I love that exposition on that relationship between like, again, back to that duality of self and other, or
Mm.
ego and other really, because it's the ego that views itself as separate within that
Mhm.
context. It's, and,
Mhm.
and we can, I think the ego gets a lot of flack. I think there's a lot of, the light and love type of hippie that's like, well, I don't have an ego,
Oh my God, don't get me started.
which is an ego in its own right.
I mean, yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
because an ego is a necessary container.
Mm,
Without that container, there's truly no separation, and I mean we pathologize that in reality. Like
yeah.
it's there's a number of pathologies I think we would associate with there not being a boundary between ego and the world around it, and that the ego is protective in that while there's like billions and trillions of signals that our body is picking up at any point in time from our environment, but there's maybe one thing at the top of our mind. Like that's the role the ego is playing, is like being that mediator and that filter. And I love that Jung uses the word self to talk about this, in that it's both specific enough that when people hear it, they're like, okay, I know what that, like, I'm a self, like, um, but also vague enough where when you really start to think about it, you're like, well, what is being a self? Like,
Mm.
or you think about, and you see it in the evolution of like an individual's consciousness as they grow up. Like you think about a child and you ask, who are you? And between the ages of like 3 and 5, they'll tell you their name, they'll tell you their friend's name, they'll tell you their mom's name, they'll tell you maybe their favorite toy or cartoon. Like it's like them and the things that they possess.
Mm.
And as we grow up, it's like both as our brain continues to grow as well as we gain more experiences, it's like more and more expansive. Like we take on labels. I'm a business person. I'm an artist. I'm a this. I'm a that. It's all of these containers that we kind of permeate through. And what Jung also articulates is on this journey of recognizing the self and becoming the self is the inevitable way that we bump into paradox, that
Mm.
certain things that maybe our self gravitates towards come into conflict with either how our family or society view the way things should be. And I mean, Nietzsche talks about a lot of this in almost very cynical terms, but it's just like there's society is like a cage that we've put ourselves in, and
Yeah.
like we need to free ourselves from this cage, but like that is the fundamental like thing to resolve. And I think that resolution, bringing it back to archetype and symbol in the Western world, is very much like good and evil. Like,
Mm.
what does it mean to be good and what does it mean to be evil? And these outward symbols of like Christ and the devil, literally like a fiery red imp who's like got a little pitchfork and gonna cause
Yeah.
a whole bunch of trouble. Like, it's,
Krampus. Yeah.
yeah, little Krampus gonna come ruin your Christmas. Yeah.
Right. And so then the task is to identify the good and evil within self so you don't begin to magnify those things outside of you. Um, and I think we see a lot of this work in psychology right now shifting towards that. There's a lot of acknowledgement, at least in my circles. The world is in extremes because we are in extremes within ourselves. And we're being asked to, in this moment, like identify parts of selves that contain things we consider to be evil. And why are we othering them? Why are we calling them evil? Why are we needing to push them as far away? And this is where things like, IFS, inner family systems, come into play, of like identifying parts of self that we think are completely destructive or harmful to being, and in reality, they're just aspects that we need to reapproach a relationship with, to ask them to come into more alignment with how we intend to appear in the world.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think you're touching on and bridging into like in the Jungian term, like the shadow. It's like, what's this
Mm.
part of us that we have not given life to because we've seen it as evil, or society has told us it's evil. So we've put it in a cage and we've locked it up.
Yeah.
But by doing that, like we haven't resolved the need or desire being expressed. And I think too, archetypally, there's this idea in numerous traditions of like beings or entities that have like mirrors. Like I think of like even the relationship between like an Eve and a Lilith,
Mm.
or I'm gonna totally butcher the names, but like in Goetian magic, there's like angels, and each angel has a corresponding demon, and they both like, it's like, having pride in oneself can be a positive thing. Like it's confidence that
Ah.
allows you to go out into the world, but it also can be a negative thing if that's not grounded in any reality. And it's like, well, how do I navigate like what that confidence can do for me in terms of helping me share my gifts in a way that is supportive of life and its cycles,
Mhm.
and yet like to integrate that element without causing harm is, I
Yeah.
think, really the mission.
Yeah, and I think we do see a lot of harm, and we see people, I don't know, like I'll even use myself as an example. I think when religion became something that wasn't working for me anymore, I went to the exact and opposite extreme where I didn't believe in anything that was, I don't know, mythical or holy or divine. And I found so much within me that was lost kind of emerge. And in that way, I think um, my life then started begging for some symbology, for meaning, for synchronicity. And I think I fell into this kind of extreme depression and chaotic seeking phase of my life as a consequence of losing this really necessary aspect of self, even when it became somewhat of a cage, And I think when we leave cages to some extent, we tend to go full force in the opposite direction. And with the exploration of Jung and the archetypes is sort of allowing you to step out of cages that perhaps have kept you in them for years and years and understand, oh, you like might have picked that cage for a reason. It might have been safe and comfortable and given you logic in ways that you'll never understand again.
Yeah, yeah, and back to like Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, it's like that initial stage is, I always love Lord of the Rings as the analogy because it's like the Shire is like the best cage. Like you're just like
Totally.
smoking pipes and getting drunk with the boys, and there's not a worry in the world
Come on.
until like this wizard shows up and sends you on an adventure, and then all of the terrible things happen. Then you're missing your second breakfast, and you're
Sure. Elevensies, come on.
yeah.
Get elevensies? No more.
And there's a reality there too, and I think something to be honored that I think it's, I mean, you and I have both definitely gone through this process of stepping out of the cage, and it's kind of like opening Pandora's box. Like once it's open, it's like, well, I don't even fit in there anymore. Like if I'm gonna go back to a cage, it's got to be a different shape or a different size or have some different things in it. But then also I think giving some acknowledgement to, if we are in a cage and that cage is providing us some level of safety and survival, and that is also okay and can be okay for a period of time. Like it's not always our objective to be escaping and running forward. And that's, I think, part of these archetypes tell us this too, is there are time for action and there is time for waiting and patience and enduring. And the archetypes can be helpful in navigating those different chapters of our life.
Yeah, you're, like, really unearthing, like, the archetype of the hanged man for me right now, which
Mm, mm.
has come to me at such frustrating parts of my life where I've been like, "No,
I don't wanna.
I don't wanna." I remember I was in London right before COVID, and I got the hanged man, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting," and then it was just from then on, 2020, nothing but hanged man material.
Nothing but hangman. We were all hanged men at
We're
that
all
point.
hangman for sure. But the beauty of the hangman is also, like, learning to find comfort in that suspension, learning to find some sort of understanding in that moment. Like if we look at the hangman in the traditional Smith Rider Waite tarot, they aren't upset. They might like they look a little bored to me, but they're also like a little like curious. They're kind of like, okay, this is like a part of the dance. The suspension is necessary to the liminal space, and the liminal space holds like extreme wisdom. I
Mm,
find in my life, I'm consistently in liminal spaces and fascinated with the archetype of the liminal space because it's where most want to exit immediately. It's severely uncomfortable. We fucking hate the liminal space, but that's the growth edge. That's like right where you tend to learn, oh, this is where I reach, like, wisdom. Oh, wow.
mm.
And usually we look back and we're like, "Oh, yeah, that's when that happened, when I was, like, so messed up and I, like, didn't wanna talk to anybody and I was all alone." Like, "Oh, dang."
Mhm, mhm.
Absolutely. And yeah, the archetype of the hangman is like, "Come on, baby, like, this is good stuff right here. Come on in. Like, you're about to
Yeah.
get some deep understanding. Let's go."
Yeah, there's so much in that symbol that I love. I know in certain renditions, the the scaffolding he's hung from is like the Hebrew letter tau, which
Ooh.
is like, there's in itself a very like potent symbol of like, all right, you're like just wading through time right now, man. And the way that his legs are crossed are literally like kind of in a cross. And
Mm.
so there's something to be said about like just the construction of our circumstances through the four elements that are all interplaying and finding some kind of stasis. And in some traditions I've read, the hanged man is also associated with this like Vedic idea of samadhi, like which is just like just being present, like that place that you get to
Mm.
in meditation where it's absolute stillness. And you get to your point, like he's not struggling as he's hanging there. He's like totally still.
Mm.
And there's somewhat of a metaphor between, I think, the stillness that we can find in meditation and like the patience to endure some of those moments where we're really like going through it and we just need to keep being patient.
Absolutely. Ooh, that is so powerful. And I never thought about the hangman like that before. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, well, that's the beauty in archetypes is you can talk to like 100 people about the same symbol and they would have some different association, which like the logical left brain hates, and it's why a lot of this gets dismissed as like not helpful. Because yeah, I mean it's not helpful if you're doing something empirical which needs specific measurements. Don't use the hangman as a guide for like building a bridge or something like that. Um,
Wait,
but
but this just like makes me think about like non-Euclidean geometry, right? Like
mm,
even in the left brain world, like we have to go into the expanse of the illogical in order to understand the rules and the logic that
yeah,
we exist within. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like everything in science after non Euclidean geometry has been more and more like illogical.
Totally.
I think there's like the reality that most of us don't understand it. So the scientists can get away with continuing to publish papers about it. And we're like, okay, that's just something I don't
A
understand.
point
And
definitely isn't a point, sure.
yeah, yeah, of course, of course. A wave and a particle, sure, they're like the same thing. Why not?
Why not?
Yeah.
What is your current practice with the archetypes? Is there anything that's like super integral to your daily life where archetypes play a part?
I do find it's quite transient with kind of where my focus ends up going, and but the foundation I would say is like a reflective journaling practice, like just
Mm.
taking the opportunity to almost stream of consciousness like what's present. Currently going through Julia Cameron's Artist's Way, so it's like forcing me to do that, and like just through that there's like you're writing, you're forcing yourself to write 3 pages no matter what every day.
Mm.
And I mean, like this morning, I noticed as I was writing, I was like, looking for things to write. And I'm like, wow, the sun is shining through the window today.
Mm.
And I started to write of it, noticing how each of the like hairs on my arm, like were reflecting the sunlight in some different kind of way, kind of like the grass on a summer morning. And it's like November right now in Canada and it's really cold, but I was able to almost pull in this archetype of warmth and think about what warmth
Mm.
feels like just from that experience of
Mm.
sitting in a little bit of winter sun.
Mm.
And that to me, I think speaks to the power of the practice of, like, if I was going to give the practice one name, it would be the practice of awareness.
Ooh.
Like, just that opportunity to pay attention to what's happening at any moment. And the archetypes, as I said, they're kind of like the grammar for whether it's for myth or truth. I think there's a paradox there where myth is truth and truth is myth. It's
Yeah. Oh my gosh, what a beautiful image. Thank you for sharing that. Deeply poetic. And I can like I can see it and I can feel it. You know, as someone who lives in Germany, the moments in which sun touches your face, like for me recently, has just been like euphoria, like just joy filling my whole body after like a week of darkness. And so creating that level of presence through allowing like the flow and the inhabiting the archetype in this way is so, so beautiful. You know, I'm like recently feeling a little afraid of archetype because
mm,
I think I've mentioned this to you, but I've been returning to the book of Job and then a lot of shit went down in my life. And it was really hard. And it felt like, okay, I want to return to this. For transparency, I've been reading Ettinger's analysis of Jung, ego, and archetype. Totally recommend it. He breaks down William Blake's etchings alongside Jung's analysis of Job. And let me tell you, it's a treat in and of itself. But Job is pretty like central in my exploration of my dynamic within religion and then discovering spirituality. And so I was like, oh, this is so big. And my mentor was like, yeah, we're going to slow down and we're going to do one etching at a time in line with Ettinger and Jung. And then as I started doing that, this full alignment to Job losing all of his stuff started happening in my life. And I was
Yeah.
like, I'm like invoking the archetype right now. It's happening to me. And I think it was the first time that I realized, like, yeah, maybe like the cages that we were talking about earlier, or we can consciously pull this in order to perhaps unearth something richer and more potent and more alive within ourselves. But now I'm like in the uncovering place of all the things that needed to be taken away in order for me to see the importance and the suffering a little bit.
Hmm.
And I'm like, I don't know if I want to be here, dude. Like, I'm ready to go back to the Empress. Like, this is not where
Yeah.
I thought I would.
Let me go to a happier archetype.
Any other, the high priestess even. But no, we're here. And I think just like we choose our own cages sometimes. I remember one time I was at this party, and I sang Moon River, which is like one of my favorite songs to sing. My Nana taught it to me. And this woman looked at me and she said, you should be very careful about the songs that you sing because they are your world. And I was like, wait, what's going on in Moon River? Like I had this whole moment. But like we totally call in energy and
Mm.
power and magic in this way that it does start to define our reality. And it could be even that it kind of slips in the back door. Like Job is just like, I'm here, I'm hanging out. I've always been here in your psyche. Have you actually taken the time to uncover me? And eventually it's going to come for you. And that's a whole different way of approaching it.
Yeah. And when as you're speaking, it reminds me of this concept of theurgy.
Say
And I
more.
think I think it was Plotinus, one of the post-Plato philosophers who wrote a whole bunch about this. And it was just this like observed experience of when we pray and say certain magic words and call upon certain hymns and use related symbols, like that does have an effect. It's almost like, I think in modern contexts, like some might call this like white magic,
Mm,
using divine texts as a way to invite certain things in.
mm,
Something I grew up that was really potent. Anytime we get sick, there's like 3 verses of the Quran that you like read over the sick person, or you read over their water and like breathe onto the water and then give them the
whoa.
water. And these traditions exist in so many different cultures, like this idea
Yeah.
that our words and our intention have a real power. And I think this is also something within the tradition I grew up in, like the intention or the niyat is foundational to your action, to the point that your action actually doesn't count for anything if you did not do it with an intention. And there's some value in that level of taking intention seriously. Like intention is
Yeah.
serious business.
It is. It is. Yeah, yeah. And I think also in that context, if you're really pouring your conscious and unconscious thought into intention, then the outcome also really matters to you. I also think this is something in society that's shifting as well. Is and when I was growing up, and even in my early 20s, this concept of intentionality was really important. But then I started working in more minority communities, in community, like in shelters and rehabs. And I remember hearing this statement, intention versus outcome. What happened here? And I think when intentionality is done right, the outcome is equally as important, right? Whereas I think religion and maybe some aspects of spirituality, the outcome isn't as important to the person making the intention. It really has to do with just sitting with the intention. I think, with our common thread as well, and this idea of interdependence and communal respect to one another and being connected to the whole, we want to bring in this part of intention that's so holy and sacred and what we're thinking about into the outcome of our lives and have faith in that outcome that it's going to, do well if we're actually practicing by some sort of construct. Maybe I took us away from where you're
Uh,
going at, but that's where my mind immediately floated to.
it's definitely a valuable tangent as I think about uh, something I think important to touch on in this discussion, which is like the practicality of these tools and your point around that the link between intention outcome and like the values we hold. Like I've worked my career in like business management and leadership. There's something very real to be said about like there are research studies around values and how those can make or break an organization and its ability to respond to change, and not just having the value, because anybody can say like we value integrity,
Yeah.
but then there should be a behavior mapped to that value. And I was listening to Brene Brown and Adam Grant talk about this. It's like you should both measure and reward the behaviors that align with values in order to create a culture which embodies said value.
Mm.
And for me, Brene Brown in her new book talks about this metaphor between like physical activity and leadership, where like
Mm.
she had to do a bunch of sports rehab after having an injury and recognize that she had that injury because she had no like core strength. She had no foundation. She had no grounding, and bringing that into the organization in terms of like, well, what is your grounding? Like, what are you standing on? And I think there's an additional mirror in terms of what's happening in our psyche. And I think this is the beautiful element of like this intentional practice for me,
Mm.
is that a lot of these idiosyncrasies in terms of places I spend my time, whether it's with family, friends, music, art, my work, I used to almost feel like I was juggling all of these different things and like,
Mm.
oh my God, it's so busy and how am I going to get any of it done? When in reality, it's like the goal is not really to get it done, it's to exist with it.
Mm.
And then
Mm.
you start to notice through things like archetypes, the parts of it that rhyme, that my ability to observe and witness complexity in terms of human systems lends quite well to my ability to operate in leadership and leadership support roles, but also lends to my ability to make really cool electronic music. Like it's the same underlying archetype of Mercury, of being able to discern and divide and notice and categorize.
I love that. Yeah, like the reflection of the many channels of self. Yeah, whenever we try to just see ourselves, especially in the modern context, like just being your job or just being your role in the family, or like so limiting, and we often can see how harmful it is when we force ourselves into just one thing that we think is the most important. Parts of our identity and our soul become so, yeah, I think we can feel sadness or depression, or other extremes start to pop out fighting that within our psyches when there's suppressed aspects of self. To hear you talk about, like, oh yeah, Mercury, all of these things, like that's the embodiment of like the truth of being able to lean into the spiritual or the psychological, that allows for expansiveness while within the symbol. And that's super beautiful. And it's like the attempt, right? Like it's really hard to do that, I would say, in a world that thinks of Mercury like, okay, when I think of Mercury, I think of like the little cartoon character from Hercules when I was little. And yeah, that's immediately where my mind goes to. Or I think about it in Greek myths, and it's like, okay, but Mercury is today as well, and exists in all of these beautiful modern ways. And how do we translate it? Well, what you just said, we find these parts of self that show up.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Mercury, one of the attributions is that he loves competition. And,
Mm.
I was sitting in a baseball stadium this year watching the Blue Jays, and I was like, wow, look at my boy go. Like, look at,
Killing it.
yeah.
Nice. Well, I think maybe we can start tending towards the end here. How do you feel
I
about
think
that?
so. I think we're coming up on around an hour, and that feels like a healthy attention span. If anyone has listened this far, then I'm super thrilled.
Incredible, honestly.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I was thinking a nice way to close out, which you mentioned before we started recording, was ways to engage the listeners if they made it
Hmm.
this far.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for as we're evolving this, like there's I think some intention both you and I have expressed in building community around it. Right now we're recording. I haven't even fully synthesized or figured out where I'll be posting it. So you might be listening to this on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts or some obscure radio station.
Hopefully the latter for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Our demographic.
Um, yeah, but in the meantime, I think there's, you can find me at ali-abbas.me, and that's kind of my portfolio site where I'm writing down a lot of the connections between the ideas of myth and archetype and
Mm,
philosophy and linking them to things like system dynamics and science and math and like just trying to show that archetypal map, show like at least in the way that my own mercurial self views it. I'm on Instagram as Alchemical Ali, and I'll probably be like posting snippets of this. And yeah, I'd invite anybody who enjoyed listening to, or who didn't enjoy listening, to send some comments, DMs, like what did you like, what did you not like, where would you like this to
yeah.
go? Yeah, what do you think? Does that sound good to you? Where can people find you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so I think where I'm most active on the internet currently is Instagram, and you can kind of see on my grief and growth guide handle that I do a lot to explore grief as listed in the name, but also boundaries within our lives, with others, with ourselves, with family. And as a grief coach and a death doula, I'm sort of exploring more taboo parts of life and why we're afraid to talk about them, why we're afraid to be direct about them. And, I would love to engage with you there, or you can email me at griefandgrowthguide at gmail.com. And yeah, I love this invitation to the listener. And I also would invite people that want to hear a certain myth, us talk through a myth in particular or an archetype in particular. That would be a really exciting invitation for me. I think there's some other podcasts that I love to hear the myths read out loud
Mm,
and then the analysis and then the observation. So if that's something that's exciting to you, like, okay, I've always heard this certain parable or this certain myth. Like, can you find the actual text and can you read it and restate it, and kind of give it life? And yeah, that also feels really fun to me. But any context would be great. Any
yeah,
feedback would be
yeah. No,
awesome.
that does sound a ton of fun. And yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll end up talking about like Warhammer 40K because that's got a whole mythology in itself
Never
that
know.
I've spent way too much time with.
Excited
But
about that. Hell yeah.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, as you mentioned earlier, we're both coaching, and yeah, love your practice around coaching around the taboo. It's been very inspiring in my own journey, and yeah, I've been building my practice around supporting individuals navigating identity and mapping that to narrative and stories
Mhm.
and how we go out into the world and do things, and using my familiarity with myth and archetype to meet people where they are, because
Yeah,
there's multiple languages for these same kind of universal experiences we're all getting to move through on this beautiful journey called life.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for sitting down with me today, Ollie. It was a pleasure, and I'm really excited about the next episode.
Yeah, thanks to you as well. Take care.
You too.